Welcome back to the Middle of Culture. I am one of your hosts, Peter.
And I am your other host, Eden.
Eden, besides freezing where you are, how's it going?
That is by far the biggest thing. It's really nasty out there. I was telling Peter beforehand, we got a bunch of snow, and then it has some very prodigious wind chill, I will say right now. I was just trying to get the pups back inside, Loki specifically back inside after we had taken them out. Well, I'm by myself right now. I had taken them outside and I was trying to usher him back inside before we were sitting down to record, and he was off in the corner futzing about, and I was just like, don't make me put on a coat and boots and trudge out there in the snow to get you, buddy. But I did. I had to go out and get him because he was too cold. And so he was picking his little paws up off the ground like, oh no, they're too cold. And I was like, you did this to yourself. You walked to the back corner, sir. You didn't need to go there. Anyway, how are you?
We can fix this. I am okay, hanging in there. You know, work is just, it's just always there. It's always work. And, but hey, I got to use our brand new robot today. Yes, in fact, apparently I was the first one to use the new DaVinci 5 system.
Tell me more about that.
It's just another freaking DaVinci robot. The console looks more reminiscent of Eve from Wall-E. It's kind of sleek, smooth corners, white with little handles on the side that you use to adjust the ergonomics of the console that have a blue light around a black circle. So no, it's just a DaVinci. It's just an intuitive DaVinci surgical robot. We use them for prostates, kidneys, reconstructive cases. I was doing a kidney cancer surgery today. And it's cool. It's nice. It has a lot of bells and whistles that the older version didn't. I'm sure over time I will come to appreciate some of them. Today, I just wanted to get the case done and taken care of. So the rep from Intuitive was trying to dazzle me with all the nifty things that the DaVinci 5 will do. And I was kind of like, cool, can you get out of my way so I can do surgery now, please? But hey, it was fun. It was neato.
That's pretty cool. I do have an important question for you.
Please.
Is that robot a person?
Well,
this might be a preview of coming attractions for things we're going to talk about later in the episode, listeners. But
so here, I will even go one further and say, if we were to ask, say, John Siracusa of Mac Tech fame, who has a podcast with Jason Snell on The Incomparable titled Robot or Not, given the fact that this robot does nothing autonomously, it doesn't actually even meet John Siracusa's criteria of what is a robot.
Okay, that's fair.
It does nothing that without me telling it to do it. I control every aspect of it, which is probably okay.
Yeah, it is a surgical robot, so we don't necessarily want it acting on its own. We want it acting under only your direction.
Correct. You know, things can go wrong when robots start exercising their autonomy, or perhaps are overridden. Their autonomy is overridden.
Yeah. However, we also shouldn't enslave our robots, Star Wars, but we can talk about that another day. I was talking about that because I was talking at work with a friend about the thing we're going to be talking about later today, and then I was positing where does one draw that line? And often it's a stupid, arbitrary thing. A lot of the things that are like, is this really of course it is. Like, of course R2-D2 is a person. Like, he has feelings. Yeah. He meaningfully communicates. He has sapience. He's a person, which means Luke Skywalker is a slave owner. But we don't need to think about that, because if we think about that, suddenly it makes me not like the Star Wars movies very much.
You know, there's a lot of media where that can break down if we think too hard about it. So sometimes we have to not.
True. Anyway, what have you been up to?
You know, not a whole lot. I've been trying to think. I think honestly, mostly reading. Read obviously the what we will be talking about a little bit later today. I have been continuing to work on the Lost Metal, Mistborn Book 7, and am enjoying that. I had some time at work on, I think it was a Monday where I had a little bit of time because things just were really weird Monday morning. Maybe it was Tuesday. I don't remember. But been reading that and then decided, my goal is to always have one fiction book I'm reading and one nonfiction book that I'm reading. And currently the nonfiction book that I have elected to read is called Think, a something introduction to philosophy. I just realized I don't really know much about philosophy other than, little pop culture references that people pick up and stuff. And I thought, I should at least read about it and learn a little bit. So mostly just kind of reading, not much TV, certainly no movies. I do not think I have played a video game since last we spoke. And in terms of music, which, usually I can kind of break out something with the music, there isn't a whole lot. That's really honestly it for me. What about you? Do you have something, a little more interesting to things to share with us today? Because I'm swinging and missing.
Yeah, there are a few things I could talk about that I've been checking out. I finished Nichijou, the first 10 volumes. Okay. I have not. So I talked about it last time. I really enjoyed it. It finished, I want to say, in 2013, 2014, something like that. But it did come back in 2023, so there is another volume of it that has come out since the box set was put together. Okay. So I haven't picked that up yet because I'm trying to spend a little less money. And I have all these stacks of books I need to read on the desk behind me that you can see in the Zoom call. Yeah. I should read those before I buy more stuff. So I'm trying to do that. Often failing, but trying. But I finished Nichijou.
A worthwhile thing.
It remained delightful. It ended up in a really beautiful, kind of bittersweet way. Really just stellar stuff. One of the best comics I've ever read. What else did I do? I read the second volume of My Dear Detective, which is a comic that is about a woman detective in 1920s Showa era Japan, like the first female detective, essentially. And I read the first book probably 6 or 7 months ago when it came out, and I really enjoyed it. But I did remember that it ended on a cliffhanger. So when I picked up the second volume, I did have to go read the last chapter of the previous book to remind myself where to situate things. Because I opened up this one and I was like, oh, they're tied together on the train tracks and a train is coming. I should remind myself why that's happening.
Yeah, that is a bit of a cliffhanger, isn't it?
It is. And also, it was really fun because that's like the most tropey possible thing in the world. Tie him up and put him on the train tracks. Yeah. And so it's kind of fun in the ways in which this comic kind of traffics in decades old tropes in order to kind of situate it in its time period. Okay. I really enjoyed it. I'm very excited for volume 3 in a few months. It also ended kind of on a cliffhanger. They clearly like doing that with this book, which is annoying, but also kind of fun. But it was good. I really liked it. And in terms of games, I did what I said I was going to do. I signed up for Game Pass and started playing Indiana Jones and the Great Circle.
And how is it?
And it's pretty good, all told. Like, I'm having a okay time with it. I haven't played it in a couple of days because I got distracted with other things, but sure. I made it through the whole, like, first big area. Like, I can see what the schema of the game is, like there's a quick tutorial that is basically recreating the first little bit of Raiders of the Lost Ark when he's going in after the golden idol. Sure. And it's like, okay, tutorials, whatever. But you very quickly end up in Rome, and that is your first like big place. You are in the Vatican. And so you're doing all this like exploring. There's a lot more like exploring and sneaking and doubling back to do side quests and things like that. That's not what I expected this game to be. I expected it to be a lot more like Wolfenstein, where it's like shooter levels. I just expected it to be brawling more than shooting, which there's a lot of brawling. I have not shot a gun once.
Oh, wow.
I have broken a lot of shovels over Nazis and fascists' heads.
Love that.
And I have beaten a lot of them to death with my bare fists.
Love that more.
Yeah. Again, you're in the Vatican, so you're surrounded by fascists that the subtitles are not like coy about. They're all just labeled fascist in the subtitles. And what were the fascist black shirts famous for? Walking around with a big old billy club. So you beat the tar out of one of them, and then you pick up that billy club and you beat the next one to death with the other guy's billy club. And it's pretty satisfying.
That's fantastic. That is as it should be.
But yeah, there's a lot of going back and forth and like disguising yourself in different outfits so that you're not caught being places you shouldn't be. And it's pretty fun. I made it through all of Rome. I've made it to the second city, which is Giza. And I think based on things I've picked up, I think there's basically 5 big spaces that you're going to work through in this game. And I'm to the second one. And I'm probably like 5-6 hours in. So this is probably a 20-25 hour game. Not too bad, all told.
Okay,
but I do need to get back to it. But I'm enjoying it so far. It's pretty good.
Nice.
I'd recommend it.
I will have to play it eventually. But
then while I was just, scrolling through Game Pass, as one does, I saw that Eiyuden Chronicle the 100 Heroes or whatever it's called is on there. And so I, of course, had to download that and give it a try because I've been really curious about that game. Have you heard of this game at all?
I have not. It does not sound familiar at all.
Are you familiar with the PS1 and PS2 era RPG series Suikoden?
Yes.
Well, this is a Suikoden game.
Oh, okay.
It might not be called Suikoden because Square Enix holds the rights to Suikoden.
Sure.
But it's made by the dude who made the first 3 Suikoden games.
Okay.
And he's like, I'm going to do one of those. We'll call it Eiyuden now instead of Suikoden, but it's fine. It looks incredible. The thing about this game, it really is a thing to look at because it's doing the same sort of thing that a lot of those recent Square Enix remakes are doing, the HD 2D thing.
Sure.
Where the backgrounds are like these kind of photorealistic 3D spaces, and then there are 2D sprite-based characters moving through the 3D spaces. Mm-hmm. And it's a really interesting vibe. It looks incredible, and it plays really well. It's a very traditional turn-based game, but I'm having a really good time with it so far. It seems like a real winner. I do wonder, I've never played Suikoden, but I've always thought to myself, how do you keep track of 108 possible characters?
Yeah.
Because of all of the RPGs I've played, I gotta say, Mass Effect 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition maybe have the biggest parties, potential parties, because Mass Effect 2 has 12 companions, 12 companions?
I think so. Something about there.
12. I think it's 12 with the 2 DLC characters. It's too many.
Yes.
There's a reason why in both the previous and the future game they were 6, not 12. 6. And I want to say Dragon Age Inquisition is similarly sized, and I can barely keep track of that. And I never took Cole into a single fight in any time I played Dragon Age Inquisition. He seemed like a nice guy. I didn't need him on my team.
Nope.
So I just don't know how I'm going to keep track of 100 potential characters.
Yeah, that's
and
wild.
how do you pick the team that you take into any given dungeon or any given area, and how do you keep track of what they're doing? So I am curious to see how that works, because people really like Suikoden and have been begging for years for a new Suikoden game, which is why I think this guy basically came out of retirement and was like, if Square will not do it, I will do it. And they've made this game that is, for all intents and purposes, a Suikoden game, is really highly regarded by the folks who like that series, and I'm having a very fun time with it so far. But
cool.
But I've met 6. And I think 2 of them are not in the game anymore because they were with the Empire, and I think I'm going to war with the Empire now after a time skip. So I think functionally I know 4 of the 100 potential party members.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like it.
So we'll see how it goes. And that's kind of where I'm at. I Haven't really done much of anything else. New outfits are dropping in Infinity, Nikki, as we speak. The game is updating.
Oh boy.
New
I'm
4-star
excited for you.
fits. I'm very excited. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Cool. Well, this week we thought, all right. So here's a not so secret, because I may have done this quite recently as well. One of the great things about having a pop culture related podcast is it can be a great excuse/reason to check out something that you have been meaning to get to, but just haven't gotten around to it yet.
Yeah.
As we mentioned, that was one of the reasons I said, let's watch the Matrix movies, all of them. And you know what? That was the same trick I decided to pull this week. So a number of years ago, I decided that I was going to try and read all the Hugo and Nebula winners every year. Ooh. Now, that didn't really ever happen.
I mean, it's a lot of books.
But I told myself I was going to. And in the midst of this, in somewhere either 2017 or 2018, I couldn't tell you which, the novella All Systems Red by Martha Wells won in 2017 one of those two awards for Best Novella, and in 2018 won the other award for Best Novella. And so I picked up the Kindle book. And then I kind of forgot about it. And then a sequel came out, and then another, and then another. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think it may be up to 6 books or 7. It's 6 or 7.
7
novella-ish books now. So,
well, two are full-length novels. I'm looking at the list right now. 5 and 7 are both full-length, which again, quibbling when it comes to where's the line between a novella and a novel. Like, there are plenty of things called novels that I think were short enough they could have called a novella, and there are plenty of things that Stephen King calls a novella that I'm like, that's 3 times longer than most people's novels, dog.
You know, I am coming from a world where the next novel I will be reading, Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson, is 1,360 pages long. It is 63 and a half hours on audiobook. And so anything under like 500 pages in my messed up brain has turned into basically a novella at this point. So, but yeah. So there have been a number more of these, and as we mentioned previously, when we were talking about things that we're looking forward to, one of the things I mentioned is actually that Apple has announced that Apple TV is going to be doing a series based on the Murderbot Diaries. And so I thought to myself, hey, this is as good a time as any to actually get in and read those. And so I proposed that you and I read All Systems Red, the first book in the Murderbot Diaries. And it's about 150 pages or so, depending on how you read it. And so that's what we did. And Eden, why don't you go ahead and start off and tell us just kind of initial thoughts. What did you think about All Systems Red?
I had a pretty good time with it, all told. Like,
okay.
It is one that I too have been recommended many times, despite its name and frankly how violent it can get at times. I know that it's sort of considered to be like a quasi cozy sci-fi book. Like, it traffics in those circles, even though I don't feel like that's what it is. But the same sort of lists that I see it on are the same sort of lists that I see like Legends and Lattes on, which like that book sucks, but it is like really a cozy book. And this isn't it, but it feels like mildly adjacent to it.
Sure.
Like,
okay. I can
which
see
I don't
that,
know why.
I wouldn't have
I don't know
thought
why
of
I
it.
feel that way about it. But like the people who have the people in my life who have recommended it to me are people who like cozier, softer, quieter media rather than say hard sci-fi or epic fantasy or things like that.
Okay.
But I had a really good time. It didn't blow me out of the water. It didn't make me say, oh my God, I got to go download all 7 or all 6 of these I haven't gotten to yet. But it did make me go, yeah, I'd read another one of those in a couple of months probably. How about you?
I think that pretty much lines up with what my experience was. Now, the first thing I will say is I was pleasantly surprised at what the story actually turned out to be, because for some reason, I cannot tell you why, other than the fact that it is in a series called the Murderbot Diaries. For some reason, in my brain, I had convinced myself that this was a series of stories about a cyborg, android, whatever, that went haywire and just started murdering everybody.
Which,
You
maybe,
know,
but not in this book.
but I don't know why. That was what I assumed that this was going to be. And so I was pleasantly surprised that it was not that. When, who knows what happens down the road? We'll have to find out if we read that, or if I read that at some point. But yes, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed my time. I did not regret the relatively short amount of time it took to read 150 pages. And I thought to myself, you know what? Yeah, I'll probably read the next one at some point in the next little bit. It's not on the, my priority to use the book talk parlance. It's not on my priority TBR list, but it is on the list of, when I feel like I need a break from perhaps epic fantasy or something like that, then this would be a nice little dip my toes into some sci-fi and then kind of move on to something else. So yeah, I enjoyed it. Agreed. I wasn't blown away. I was not like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. But it was enjoyable enough that I'm looking forward to seeing how they potentially interpret this for a TV series. And again, I'll probably read some more of these in the future.
Yeah.
So I'll give a quick rundown. Again, it's not very long, only about 150 pages or so. And it's all told from the point of view of Murderbot. Now, Murderbot is a sec unit or security kind of android type. It's part machine and it has organic parts as well. But it's all told from the point of view of Murderbot. And Murderbot is on a scientific expedition on an alien planet when one of the members of this survey team is attacked by a native creature. The aforementioned Murderbot rescues the scientist as well as another that it kind of grabs and pulls to make sure nothing happens to that. It has hacked its governor module. That was what allowed it to be controlled by humans. And really what Murderbot wants is to basically watch sci-fi soap operas. But it has a somewhat checkered past, and so it does have an interest in keeping its human clients alive. They kind of get back, and the whole survey team is a little bit confused. There was nothing in the information they have that suggested that some hostile native fauna might be there. This is not something that they were expecting or prepared for. So they start looking into it and they figure out that information regarding hazardous fauna has been deleted from their survey packet. Now, this is all kind of corporate based. So there's a corporation that then, you can buy rights to go and survey planets with the intention that if people find enough on a planet, then perhaps they'll put in a bid to actually do some mining or collection of resources, that sort of thing. And Murderbot, or these sec units, they are part of sort of the agreement. You pay to go and survey a planet, and you get, depending on the size of your team, the size of the operation, a certain number of sec units. You're going to get a hub, a habitat. You're going to get some hoppers, little vehicles that allow you to move around to different parts of the planet. And then you've got a beacon. And the beacon is something that you can launch. Will fly up basically through a wormhole, communicate, and get the corporation to send out aid to either get you off the planet or something like that. And so they realize that some of the maps that they have been given are missing sections, and the survey team is Preservation Ox. So their preservation is a society, and they basically find out that Mensa, the captain of this team, is like the leader of preservation. And so as you kind of get down into it, they realize that they think maybe the corporation is working against them and has been hiding this. But basically Murderbot's like, no, this would be way too big of a political nightmare if this had happened. This has got to be something else. There's another group that they're aware of called Deltfall. They're trying to contact them. They lose contact with Deltfall. They take their hopper over to the Deltfall habitat, and they discover that everyone there has been brutally murdered and that one of the 3 sec units that they had have been destroyed. Murderbot then finds the 2 others while it's kind of exploring through and disables them. But then, in a big surprise, because they knew that there were only 3 sec units at Deltfall, 2 others appear. It's able to destroy one. Mensa's able to take out the other, but in the tussle, Murderbot's seriously injured, and one of these sec units has installed a combat override module into its neck. Basically, they're able to remove that and disable it before the data dump gets put into Murderbot that would allow whomever is controlling these other sec units to then have control over Murderbot. They get back to their habitat, and in the midst of getting this combat override module out and Murderbot recovering, one of the preservation scientists, who is an augmented human, has been able to figure out that Murderbot has hacked its governor module so that it is autonomous. That it also at one point malfunctioned and murdered 57 people. Now, Murderbot thinks, and it's left a little vague, but Murderbot thinks the reason it hacked its governor module was so that nothing like this could happen again, that it was because there was a fault with its governor module that caused it to murder these 57 people. But we don't know for sure. That's at least the story that Murderbot seems to be telling preservation as well as itself. They determine that there has to be a 3rd expedition who are trying to eliminate Deltfall and preservation. They don't know why. Preservation is able to confirm that their hub has been hacked, and they flee it before this other group comes to their hab. They dub it Evil Survey. It comes to their habitat and leaves a message through some drones that Murderbot left that they're able to retrieve, telling them to meet at a rendezvous point to negotiate terms for their survival. Murderbot knows that this other group, known as Grey Chris, is never going to let them live, has a plan. Basically, it makes an overture to Grey Chris to negotiate for its freedom. It's a distraction while preservation scientists, including the augmented human, they access Grey Chris's hub system and activate their emergency beacon. They then, as this is all kind of going down, there's a tussle between Murderbot and one of the other sec units while Murderbot is trying to get Mensa. They kind of, sort of at the last minute, Murderbot realizes that, hey, the company is going to save money wherever possible. And so when the beacon launches, there aren't a whole lot of safeguards in place. The beacon gets ready to launch. Murderbot is able to protect Mensa, basically launches them off the platform as the beacon launches, incinerating everybody else who is on the platform. Murderbot is seriously injured but manages to save Mensa. It kind of awakens to find itself repaired. It has its memories. Its governor module has not been replaced. It is still disabled. And he finds out that Mensa and Preservation have bought Murderbot's contract and offer to bring it back to Preservation's home base where it can live, as they say it, autonomously. Murderbot thinks about this and realizes Murderbot's not so sure. Murderbot just wants to go and be owned, and straight up has a conversation with Mensa and says something to the effect of, so you would be my guardian? And Mensa's like, yes. And so in the night before it's going to be taken to Preservation, it slips away, contacts a cargo ship, talks to the cargo ship, finds out that the cargo ship also perhaps likes to watch soap opera, sci-fi stuff, and gets on the cargo ship and takes off. And that's how it ends.
Indeed.
So I don't know what do you think about, because you kind of mentioned earlier, I think when you hinted at our droids people, our robots people.
Yes.
So
yes. Well, that becomes one of the big conversations for the regular humans, and especially the augmented human who are on the preservation team, because many of them are like, well, obviously it's a person. Whereas I do think it's interesting that the person who is most reticent to see Murderbot as a fellow person is the augmented human, the person who is also, for all intents and purposes, a cyborg, just not quite as cybernetically enhanced, modified, fucked up as Murderbot is. And I don't know, that I had a lot of thoughts about why is that person, Gurathin or whatever his name is, Gutharin, I don't remember, Why is he the one who is so hesitant to see Murderbot as a person? And it made me think a lot about respectability politics and like the ways in which people who want to differentiate themselves from other groups of people try to dehumanize them in the name of humanizing themselves. And I don't know if that's necessarily what Martha Wells was trying to do here, but that's what I was thinking of that whole time, where I was like, why is Gutharin the one guy who is like so hesitant to see Murderbot as a human? And I think that's really what it seems to come down to, is he sees the dividing line between he and Murderbot much closer than the other humans do between them and Murderbot. I don't know. What do you think?
That's exactly what I was going to say. I think it's one of these things where, as you mentioned, Garathan is also on this range, this spectrum of enhanced, moving towards more like Murderbot, perhaps, than humans. And in an effort to ensure that everybody continues to see him as human, he has to demonize or vilify or dehumanize, as you put. He needs to dehumanize Murderbot, because if Murderbot can be human, then other people could just as easily see Garathan as a cyborg, as not human. And so I don't know. That was what I took it is he is trying to say, no, this is not like me, so that other people don't think he is like it. So like I say, I think that that's why Garathan is so hesitant to accept Murderbot. Again, if he accepts Murderbot as human, then it makes it that much easier for other people to consider him not human.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Yeah, I thought it was interesting how, I don't know, it felt like the characterization for all of the other humans besides Dr. Mensa was, I mean, it's short. It's like 120 pages. It felt a little thin, though, because I was like, who are these other characters? There was a lot of them, and you didn't get to spend a whole lot of time with them. Why? And again, this is by virtue of being a first-person book, by virtue of being, about a character who is dehumanized and not a part of society. Obviously, it is not going to focus on the societal aspects the way that a person who is fully realized as a member of a society might think about things.
Sure.
But I wanted to know more about, like, what is the political state of things? Like, what makes Preservation Ox so different from these other worlds? Why does that matter? Where are things at in terms of all this sort of stuff? I wish there'd been a little bit more of that. I like what we got, but I just wish it had been a little denser, maybe.
I agree. One of the things that, just for example, like, what was Gray Chris's real motivation? Are they just trying to, they want to just have the planet? I mean, I made assumptions that they just want this planet. They don't want there to be any competition. But it's like, it feels like there's underlying socio-political reasons for these things that we never are given. We're never given those reasons.
Yeah, and it's entirely possible those things are explained and explored in some of the later books, and we just haven't gotten to those. But I do feel like therein lies the difficulty of the short novel or the novella, where sometimes it is the exact right amount, the amuse-bouche you needed, and sometimes you're like, I could have used 20 more pages here.
Yeah, I agree. What else worked for you or did not work for you?
How did you feel about the tone, the way that the book was written? How did you feel about that?
That's a good question. I thought, I liked it. I thought that I liked it being told from Murderbot's point of view, because it gave us an opportunity it was interesting to be able to dive in a little bit to Murderbot's anxiety about being around people. And so that was, I think, kind of one of the things that I enjoyed. I thought was interesting was Murderbot, for whatever reason, whether it's because of that incident murdering 57 people, because of its previous programming before it had overridden its module or its governor module or whatever, it very much, like I say, very anxious, very uncomfortable when people from preservation are trying to teach it, to interact with it as if it is human and treat it as such. And I thought that was an interesting sort of take, and being told through its eyes, kind of with that lens over everything of, I just want to go and, I want to power down a little bit and go through the sci-fi soap operas that I've downloaded. And, oh, hey, I downloaded some more. So can I not be in the middle of this, but, I have a contract to help them. I've overridden my governor module, so I don't actually have to if I don't want to, but I still feel like I should. And so I thought it was just an interesting, I liked that uncertainty about its actions and how that kind of spills into the story, because that's the point of view that the story was told from.
Yeah, I think it is that tone that gives it that reputation of being sort of cozy.
Sure,
because
I can see that.
I think that the story that is told, like the plot points that are presented, are pretty grim and paint a fairly dystopian sci-fi universe in which this, takes place. A very corporate dystopian, setting, which,
very much.
Let's be fair, every day feels more and more likely for all of us.
We're closer to it every minute that passes, it seems like.
As every single person at the CPFB or the CFPB who is tasked with investigating crime done by tech companies is all let go in one night, and you're like, oh, this is the equivalent as if the mob just fired everyone who was in charge of looking at the mob. Wow.
Yep.
So, this is the world that we live in. It feels distressingly close. But I do think that the tone in which it's written, the kind of flippant nature in which a lot of it is presented, kind of the feeling of, this character doesn't consider itself human, even if everyone else does consider it human, and that makes it kind of treat itself differently than you maybe would expect it or want it to. I think that sort of added a levity to it, and I think that's why it ends up in that milieu of the cozy sort of story, even though it, like I said, very grim, very grim. I don't know. I
think that's really interesting.
I'd be curious to see.
That's good.
I would be curious to see the way in which other dehumanized persons in this setting interact with Murderbot, and maybe I have to imagine this first book having been in first person and the series being called the Murderbot Diaries, that they are all in first person from Murderbot's point of view.
That's my guess as well.
We won't necessarily get the interiority of any of those other dehumanized persons that it sounds like exist. I mean, Murderbot is a person that is a cyborg person. It still has flesh. It still has a face, basic bipedal form. But at the end of the book, it talks to the freighter, and it sounds like the freighter is as psychologically existent as Murderbot is, even if it is embodied in a different way. It is a spaceship that is a person rather than a Murderbot that is also a person. And both of them seem as though in this setting they are going to be denied their humanness, denied their personhood. And I would be curious to see how Murderbot works as an interlocutor with some of those other dehumanized people, and the ways in which they bounce off of each other, if they feel similarly, if they feel differently, if they're longing to be recognized as humans, or if they feel that same sort of antipathy towards it, the way that Murderbot seems to.
Yeah.
It made me think a lot about the Shuya universe books that I read a few weeks ago, where similarly to this, that had ships that were people, ships that for all intents and purposes were people.
Sure.
But that was a society that recognized them as such. These are people who are who just happen to have the body of a spaceship instead of a body of a person.
Yeah.
And in this case, you have people who have the body of a person who are not considered people. So a very, very big rift, chasm between those two, the way that they see what non-normative bodied people might be interpreted as. But I don't know. I would be curious to see that in future books. And I would hope that, he's friends with that freighter captain robot now, and now they can talk about what is a person. Let's watch movies together.
Definitely. Any other thoughts?
I don't know. I thought it was fun. I'm glad that I've read it. It too has been on my TBR pile for a long time, but not necessarily on the pressing TBR pile. It's been on the maybe someday. So I was really glad that you brought it to us and gave me the excuse to finally read it.
Good. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I did as well. I think the final thing that I enjoyed was it's a minor subversion of expectations, but I liked the fact that Murderbot doesn't go to preservation with the preservation team. Doesn't go to preservation with Mensa, because
that was
you
a
can
better
tell
ending.
Mensa thinks she's doing the right thing, and but as Murderbot points out, when Murderbot asks her, "So you'll be my governor then?" And she's like, "Yeah." And Murderbot's like,
again, drawing parallels to real life things that we've seen before. And, I joked about droid slavery earlier. It feels sort of like the equivalent of the good slave owner buying this slave.
Exactly.
And then that enslaved person saying, "Nah, thank you very much, but I'm out."
Yep. And so that was the final thing I wanted to mention is I appreciated that was where Martha Wells took it, that she didn't have Murderbot just like, "Oh, look, I finally found a real home, and Papa, I'm a real boy now," and goes back to preservation with Mensa, but goes, "Nah, I've hacked my governor. I don't want to have another governor." So anyway.
Yeah, and I know from having after I read the book, I was like, let me go see this Wikipedia page. How many books are there? I know that Mensa specifically comes back in some of those later books.
Yeah.
So clearly there will be some tension there of like him reuniting with the people who he worked with previously. And I do wonder what sort of feelings that might evoke in it and in the other humans with which it interacts.
Yep.
I thought it was really I thought it was really interesting the way in which Wells never gives Murderbot gender and talks specifically about how its body is a degendered body. Like it is clearly a vat-grown human of some ilk whose body has been degendered and who feels that sense of degendering. It mentions that when it's watching its show, it always skips through the sex scenes because it doesn't get why anyone would ever be interested in that, and it certainly is not. And so it is an interesting way, and it uses for itself the pronouns it rather than even they, which is a more typical gender neutral pronoun. Or any sort of neo-pronoun. It uses the specifically depersonalized it, which I think is really interesting from like a gender perspective, a gender critical perspective. Like what makes you as a person choose to use that pronoun? And, it's a thing I think about a lot as a person who is non-binary and uses they, them pronouns and has thought to myself about other potential neo-pronouns and other, things like that. And something like it has never been attractive to me. It feels depersonalized and dehumanizing to me, but that's how Murderbot sees itself. So of course that's not of course, but it makes sense to me that would be the pronoun that it would choose to use.
Yeah, I agree.
I do wonder how they cast Murderbot.
I am interested as well to see, because I had that thought while reading it.
Because certain choices have to be made to portray Murderbot on the screen. Because there are certain societal expectations that we have. We cannot have fully degendered bodies. We are going to read gender into whoever they cast as Murderbot, regardless of what they do, the producers or creators do, to try to degender this character. We as viewers are going to read gender into that character unless they somehow cast the most androgynous person in the world who already uses its pronouns, and that's not going to be the case. Yeah. They're going to cast a person who most likely conforms with one of the two gender binary choices and then has to somehow be degendered to become Murderbot. But you're always going to be thinking, I know who this person is. I know who he is or who she is. I don't know. It'll be interesting. I'm very curious to see how they cast that.
I am as well. So, well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. We appreciate folks who are listening. We'll be back in another couple of weeks. And until then, bye.
Take care of yourselves, folks.